The desert wind carried secrets that October night in 1995, whispering across the vast expanse of sand and scrub brush that stretched endlessly along the Texas-Mexico border. Agent Daniel Vasquez had patrolled these desolate roads for 7 years, long enough to know that the silence here held more danger than most people could imagine. At 34, he was a veteran of the Border Patrol's Laredo sector, respected by his colleagues and feared by smugglers who had learned to recognize the distinctive sound of his white and green Chevy Blazer cutting through the darkness. What happened to Daniel Vasquez on the night of October 13, 1995, would haunt his family, baffle federal investigators, and spawn theories ranging from cartel execution to government conspiracy. But perhaps most chilling of all was what didn't happen: the complete and utter absence of any trace of the man who simply drove into the night and never came home. The last confirmed sighting of Agent Vasquez came at 11:47 p.m. when he radioed dispatch from mile marker 23 on Highway 83, a lonely stretch of asphalt that bisected some of the most isolated terrain in South Texas. His voice was calm, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a seasoned agent conducting routine patrol. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I have got a possible vehicle violation at mile marker 23. We're investigating now. The dispatcher, Maria Santos, had been working the night shift for 3 years and knew Daniel's voice as well as her own brother's. She acknowledged his transmission and waited for the follow-up report that never came. 20 minutes passed, then 30. By midnight, Santos was growing concerned enough to reach out. Unit 7, this is dispatch. What's your status? Silence. June. Daniel, please respond. What's your current location? The radio crackled with static, but Agent Vasquez's voice never came back. By 12:30 a.m., Supervisor Jake Morrison had deployed 2 additional units to mile marker 23. What they found there would mark the beginning of one of the most perplexing disappearances in Border Patrol history. Vasquez's vehicle sat empty on the shoulder of the highway, driver's door hanging open, engine still running. The headlights cut twin beams through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty road ahead. Inside the Blazer, everything appeared normal at first glance. The radio was functioning perfectly. Daniel's logbook sat open on the passenger seat, his last entry time-stamped at 11:45 p.m. His service weapon remained holstered in its locked compartment. His wallet, containing $47 in cash and family photos, lay untouched in the glove box. But it was what the responding agents found outside the vehicle that sent the first chill down their spines. Daniel's footprints were clearly visible in the soft sand beside the road, size 10 boots heading straight into the desert. The prints were deep and evenly spaced, suggesting he had walked, not run, into the wilderness. But after approximately 50 yards, the footprints simply stopped. Not gradually, not scattered by wind or erosion. They just ended, as if Daniel Vasquez had taken one final step and then vanished into thin air. Agent Lisa Torres was among the first responders that night, and she would later tell investigators that the scene felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. It was too quiet, she remembered. Even for the desert at night, it was unnaturally silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing. But like the whole area was holding its breath. The initial search began immediately. Border Patrol agents, local sheriff's deputies, and eventually FBI personnel combed the area on foot, on horseback, and with helicopters. They brought in tracking dogs, heat-sensing equipment, and even psychics desperate family members had contacted. The search expanded to cover nearly 200 square miles of some of the harshest terrain in North America. They found nothing. Daniel's wife, Carmen, was notified at 2:15 a.m. by Supervisor Morrison himself. She had been married to Daniel for 9 years and was accustomed to the dangers of his job, but she had never imagined anything like this. Carmen would later describe the moment as surreal, like being told that gravity had stopped working or that the sun had forgotten to rise. Jake kept saying they would find him, Carmen recalled years later, but he kept promising that Daniel was probably hurt somewhere, maybe fallen into a ravine or gotten turned around in the dark. But I could see it in his eyes. Even then, he knew this was different. The Vasquez family lived in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Ladeo, where Carmen worked as an elementary school teacher and Daniel spent his off-duty hours restoring classic cars in their garage. They had been trying to have children for several years, and Carmen had recently learned she was pregnant. She had planned to tell Daniel the news when he returned from his shift that night. Instead, she found herself at the center of a mystery that would consume the next decade of her life. The FBI took over the investigation within 48 hours, treating Daniel's disappearance as a potential kidnapping or homicide. Special Agent Rebecca Hayes, a veteran investigator with experience in border-related crimes, was assigned as lead case officer. Hayes had seen her share of agent disappearances, most of which ultimately proved to be either cartel-related violence or, in rare cases, agents who had succumbed to corruption and fled with smuggling profits. But the Vasquez case didn't fit either pattern. Daniel's financial records showed no unusual activity, no large deposits or suspicious withdrawals. His colleagues universally described him as incorruptible, a straight arrow who had turned down numerous bribes over the years and had even received commendations for his integrity. His marriage appeared solid, with no evidence of affairs or domestic problems. More puzzling still was the complete absence of any communication from potential kidnappers. No ransom demands, no political statements, no claims of responsibility from any of the cartels or smuggling organizations operating in the area. It was as if Daniel had simply stepped out of existence. Agent Hayes interviewed dozens of people in the weeks following the disappearance. She spoke with every member of Daniel's unit, his supervisors, informants, and even known criminals who might have had grievances against the Border Patrol. The picture that emerged was of a dedicated agent who had made enemies among smugglers but who had never received specific threats. 3 weeks into the investigation, Hayes received what she initially thought might be a breakthrough. A rancher named Tom Mitchell, whose property bordered the search area, came forward with a strange story. On the night Daniel disappeared, Mitchell had been awakened by the sound of helicopters flying low over his land. This wasn't unusual in itself, as Border Patrol aircraft frequently patrolled the area, but these helicopters had been operating without lights, that visible only as dark shapes against the stars. "I have lived out here for 37 years, Mitchell told Hayes. "I know the difference between our birds and others. These weren't Border Patrol. They were bigger, quieter, and they stayed in formation like military aircraft." Hayes pursued this lead aggressively, checking with every federal agency and military installation within a 500-mile radius. The responses were consistent. No authorized aircraft had been operating in the area that night. The military denied any training exercises or classified operations in the region. As autumn turned to winter, the investigation began to stall. The physical evidence was minimal and confusing. The extensive interviews had revealed no clear motive or suspect. The search had covered hundreds of square miles without finding so much as a piece of Daniel's uniform. But it was the behavioral analysis that troubled Agent Hayes most. She had consulted with FBI profilers and psychologists, trying to understand what kind of person could make another human being disappear so completely. The consensus was disturbing. Whoever was responsible possessed either extraordinary resources or knowledge that went far beyond typical criminal organizations. Carmen Vasquez gave birth to Daniel's daughter, Elena, in May 1996. She had hoped that Daniel might somehow return before the birth, that whatever had happened to him might resolve itself before he missed this crucial moment. Instead, she found herself raising their child alone while federal investigators gradually shifted their attention to other cases. The official investigation remained open, but active efforts had largely ceased by the first anniversary of Daniel's disappearance. Carmen received periodic updates from Agent Hayes, but they were always variations of the same theme: no new leads, no developments, no progress. It was around this time that Carmen began receiving the letters. The first one arrived in November 1996, exactly 13 months after Daniel's disappearance. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address, postmarked from Austin, Texas. Carmen almost threw it away, assuming it was another sympathy card from someone who had heard about her situation. Instead, she found a single sheet of paper with a message typed on what appeared to be an old typewriter. "Your husband is safe. He cannot return yet, but he thinks of you and the baby every day. Do not stop believing." Carmen immediately contacted Agent Hayes, who had the letter analyzed by the FBI laboratory. The paper was standard office stock available at any store. The typewriter was determined to be an older model, possibly from the 1970s or 1980s, but the specific make and model could not be determined from the typing sample. More letters followed, arriving at irregular intervals over the next several years. And they were always brief, always reassuring, and always maddeningly vague. Daniel is learning things that will help many people. His sacrifice has meaning. But the work he is doing is dangerous but necessary. Someday you will understand. He watches over you and Elena from a place you cannot imagine. Agent Hayes established a task force specifically to trace the letters, but each attempt led to dead ends. The postmarks came from different cities across Texas and the Southwest. The surveillance of post offices proved fruitless. Analysis of the paper, ink, and typing revealed nothing unique or traceable. By 1999, Carmen had received 17 letters. She kept them all in a shoebox in her bedroom closet, reading them whenever the grief became overwhelming. Part of her believed they were genuine communications about Daniel, while another part suspected they were cruel hoaxes from someone who took pleasure in her suffering. The letters stopped arriving in early 2000, and Carmen began to wonder if whoever had been sending them had died or lost interest. She tried to move forward with her life, raising Elena and eventually returning to teaching. But she never stopped hoping that Daniel would walk through their front door someday with an explanation that would make sense of the impossible. That hope was shattered on a Tuesday morning in March 2004, when Carmen found something in her mailbox that would reopen the investigation and plunge her family into an even deeper mystery. Elena, now 8 years old, had run outside to check the mail as she did every day after school. Carmen heard her daughter scream from the kitchen, a sound of pure terror that sent her racing toward the front door. She found Elena standing frozen beside the mailbox, staring at something clutched in her small hands. It was Daniel's badge. The gold-plated shield that had identified Agent Daniel Vasquez, badge number 1247, was exactly as Carmen remembered it. The metal was tarnished and showed signs of wear, but the engraving was still clearly visible. Most unsettling of all, the badge was accompanied by a small metal key and a handwritten note on aged paper. Box 847, Downtown Station. Tell them Daniel sent you. Carmen's hands shook as she called Agent Hayes, who had remained the lead investigator despite the case's dormant status. Hayes arrived within an hour, and together they drove to the main post office in downtown LaRue. Box 847 was located in the back corner of the building, in a section reserved for larger parcels and long-term rentals. The key fit perfectly. Inside the box was a manila envelope containing items that would fundamentally alter everything investigators thought they knew about Daniel's disappearance. There were photographs, dozens of them, showing Daniel in locations that appeared to be underground facilities. He was wearing civilian clothes instead of his uniform, and he looked older, thinner, but unmistakably alive. The photographs were time-stamped with dates ranging from 1996 to 2003, but suggesting that Daniel had been alive for at least 8 years after his disappearance. In some images, he appeared to be working with sophisticated equipment that neither Carmen nor Agent Hayes could identify. Other photos showed him in what looked like briefing rooms, apparently receiving instructions from people whose faces had been carefully obscured. But perhaps most shocking of all was a sealed letter addressed to Carmen in Daniel's handwriting. The paper was different from the anonymous letters she had been receiving, and the writing was unmistakably her husband's distinctive style. The letter was dated January 15, 2004, just 2 months before Elena found the badge. My dearest Carmen, if you are reading this, then I am either dead or have been forced to disappear permanently. I cannot explain what has happened to me without putting you and Elena in danger. But I need you to know that everything I have done since that night in 1995 has been to protect our country from threats you cannot imagine. I volunteered for something that required me to give up my old life. And I pray that someday you will forgive me for the pain this has caused. Take Elena and move away from Laredo. Start fresh somewhere safe. Do not trust anyone who claims to know what happened to me. I love you both more than words can express. The letter was signed with Daniel's full name and included details about their relationship that only he would have known. Handwriting analysis confirmed it was genuine. Agent Hayes stared at the evidence spread across her desk, trying to process implications that challenged everything she thought she understood about federal law enforcement. If Daniel was alive, or had been alive as recently as 2004, then someone within the government had been running a covert operation that required faking the death or disappearance of federal agents. But who and why? The investigation that had been dormant for nearly a decade suddenly became the FBI's highest priority. Hayes assembled a new task force, this time including agents with security clearances high enough to access classified military and intelligence programs. What they discovered in the following months would reveal a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the federal government. But that was still to come. For now, Carmen Vasquez sat in her living room, holding her husband's badge and watching her daughter play, knowing that their lives had just been thrown into chaos once again. Outside, the desert wind continued to blow, carrying secrets that were finally beginning to surface after nearly a decade of silence. The mystery of Agent Daniel Vasquez was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The fluorescent lights in FBI conference room 7 cast harsh shadows across the faces of the assembled task force as Agent Rebecca Hayes spread the contents of Post Office Box 847 across the polished table. It was April 2004, Baders and Desil Nan. What had begun as a cold case review had exploded into something that threatened to expose operations buried so deep that most of the people in the room lacked the clearance to even know they existed. Special Agent in charge Thomas Kellerman had flown in from Washington specifically for this briefing. A 30-year veteran with gray temples and eyes that had seen too much, Kellerman possessed the kind of security clearance that opened doors most federal agents never knew existed. He studied each photograph carefully, his expression growing more troubled with every image. "These facilities," he said finally, pointing to the underground chambers where Daniel appeared to be working. "I recognize some of this equipment. This is classified technology, stuff that doesn't officially exist." Agent Hayes leaned forward. "What kind of technology?" Kellerman was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much he could reveal. "The kind that certain government agencies use for operations that never make it into official records. Deep black projects that operate outside normal oversight." Dr. Patricia Winters, a forensic analyst specializing in document authentication, had been studying Daniel's letter under magnification. She looked up from her equipment with a frown. "The paper and ink are consistent with the 2004 date, but there's something odd about the aging patterns. This letter shows signs of having been stored in a controlled environment, probably underground, for an extended period." "What does that mean?" Hayes asked. "It means your missing agent was likely being held in a facility designed for long-term habitation. Temperature-controlled, low humidity, the kind of place you'd build if you planned to keep people there for years." The implications hung heavy in the room. If Daniel had been imprisoned in some kind of government facility, then his disappearance wasn't a kidnapping or murder, it was something far more sinister. Agent Michael Torres, who had been analyzing the photographs, spoke up. "I have been comparing these timestamps with known government operations along the border during this period. There were several classified programs running between 1995 and 2004, most of them related to drug interdiction and counter-terrorism." "What kind of programs?" Kellerman asked. "That's where it gets complicated. Most of the records are sealed, but I found references to something called Operation Desert Shield, not the Gulf War operation, but a domestic program that was supposedly shut down in 1994. Hayes felt a chill run down her spine. "But if Daniel disappeared in 1995, exactly, Either the program continued unofficially, or someone was using its resources for unauthorized activities. As the task force dug deeper into the classified records, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Operation Desert Shield had been a joint FBI-CIA program designed to infiltrate drug cartels operating along the Texas-Mexico border. The official record showed that it had been terminated due to budget constraints and questionable results. But the unofficial record told a different story. Agent Torres had managed to track down Harold Vance, a retired CIA operative who had been involved in the program's final phase. Vance agreed to meet at a diner outside San Antonio, far from any government facilities where their conversation might be monitored. Vance was in his 70s now, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades in the shadows. He ordered coffee and pie, then studied Torres across the Formica table with eyes that missed nothing. "Desert Shield," he said finally. "Haven't heard that name in years. What do you want to know?" "We think one of our missing agents might have been recruited into the program after it was officially terminated." Vance laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Son, Desert Shield never terminated. It just went deeper underground. By 1995, we had learned things about the cartels that made regular law enforcement look like children playing cops and robbers." "What kind of things?" "The cartels weren't just smuggling drugs. They had connections to groups that posed genuine national security threats. Middle Eastern terrorists, weapons dealers, people who could smuggle more than just cocaine across that border. We needed agents who could disappear into that world for extended periods." Torres leaned forward. "You are talking about deep cover operations. Deeper than deep. We are talking about agents who had to literally die to their old lives. New identities, new histories, families who would never see them again. It was voluntary, but once you went in, there was no coming back." "What happened to the agents who volunteered?" Vance was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee with mechanical precision. "Some of them saved lives. Probably prevented terrorist attacks that would have made 9/11s look small. And others," he shrugged. "Others disappeared into that world and never came out." Torres showed him Daniel's photograph. "Do you recognize this man?" Vance studied the image carefully, then slid it back across the table. "I have never seen him before in my life, and if I had, I wouldn't tell you. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." But as Torres was leaving, Vance called out to him. "Agent Torres? That man in the photo? He looks like someone who made a choice to protect something bigger than himself. Maybe his family should find some peace in that." Back in Laredo, Carmen Vasquez was struggling with revelations that turned her understanding of her husband upside down. The Daniel she had known was a dedicated Border Patrol agent who came home every night and helped her grade papers at the kitchen table. The idea that he had volunteered for some kind of covert operation seemed impossible. But the evidence was overwhelming. The photographs showed him working willingly, not as a prisoner. His letter suggested that he had made a conscious choice to sacrifice his old life for reasons he believed were justified. Carmen found herself reading and rereading that letter, searching for clues about her husband's mindset. One phrase in particular haunted her: "threats you cannot imagine." What could have been so serious that Daniel would abandon his family to fight it? Agent Hayes had been wondering the same thing. She had spent weeks analyzing the equipment visible in Daniel's photographs, working with technical experts to identify the machinery and instruments he appeared to be operating. And the conclusions were sobering. Much of the equipment appeared to be designed for surveillance and communication interception. Other devices looked like they might be used for tracking or monitoring large numbers of people. But perhaps most disturbing were the items that experts couldn't identify at all, technology that seemed years ahead of anything in official government use. "It's like they had access to research and development programs that were completely off the books," Dr. Winters explained during one briefing. "Some of this equipment appears to incorporate technology that wouldn't be commercially available until the mid-2000s, but these photos are allegedly from the late 1990s. Hayes was beginning to understand that they weren't just investigating a missing person case. They were uncovering evidence of a shadow government operation that had been running for decades without oversight or accountability. The breakthrough came in July 2004, when Agent Torres received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified himself as Jonathan Pike, a former Defense Intelligence Agency analyst who claimed to have information about Daniel Vasquez. Pike agreed to meet at a rest stop on Interstate 35, north of San Antonio. He was a nervous man in his 40s, constantly checking over his shoulder and speaking in whispers, even though they were alone. "I worked on data analysis for operations that officially didn't exist," Pike began. "Part of my job was tracking personnel assignments for deep black programs. Daniel Vasquez's name was on my lists. What kind of operations was he involved in? Counter-terrorism, primarily. After the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993, certain agencies became convinced that terrorists were using the Mexican border to infiltrate the United States. They needed agents who could blend into the smuggling networks and identify potential threats." Pike pulled out a manila folder containing what appeared to be personnel records. "According to my files, Agent Vasquez volunteered for the program in October 1995, just days before his official disappearance. He was selected because of his language skills, his knowledge of border operations, and his psychological profile." Psychological profile? The program required agents who could maintain their cover identities for years without psychological breakdown. They needed people who were stable, dedicated, and capable of making enormous personal sacrifices for national security. Hayes studied the documents Pike had provided. They appeared authentic, complete with official seals and classification stamps. But what troubled her most was the final entry in Daniel's file, dated March 2004. Status: terminated. Cause: compromised identity. Position: permanent. "What does permanent mean?" she asked. Pike wouldn't meet her eyes. "In the context of deep black operations, it usually means the agent was eliminated to prevent exposure of the program." The implication hit Hayes like a physical blow. If Pike was correct, then Daniel hadn't just disappeared, he had been murdered by his own government to protect classified operations. But Pike wasn't finished. "There's something else you need to know. The program didn't end with 9/11s like most people assume. But if anything, it expanded. There are agents operating along the border right now, people whose families think they are dead, who are gathering intelligence on threats that could make the Twin Towers look like a warning shot." Hayes thought about the letters Carmen had received, the reassuring messages that Daniel was safe and working for the greater good. Had they been genuine communications from Daniel, or psychological warfare designed to keep his family from asking too many questions? "How many agents are we talking about?" she asked. "None. I don't know the exact number, but based on the budget allocations I saw, probably dozens. Maybe more. They recruit from Border Patrol, DA, local law enforcement, anyone with the right skills and the right psychology." Pike stood up abruptly, clearly anxious to leave. "Agent Hayes, I'm taking a huge risk even talking to you. These people don't hesitate to eliminate threats, and that includes federal agents who get too close to their operations." "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because Agent Vasquez had a daughter. She deserves to know that her father was a hero, not a deserter. But she also deserves to live in a country where the government doesn't murder its own people to protect secrets." Pike walked away without another word, leaving Hayes alone with documents that would fundamentally change her understanding of federal law enforcement. Over the following months, Hayes and her task force attempted to verify Pike's information through official channels. They were met with denials, misdirection, and eventually direct orders to cease their investigation. Special agent in charge Kellerman was transferred to a desk job in Montana. Dr. Winters was reassigned to a different division. One by one, the task force was disbanded. But Hayes refused to give up. She had seen too much, learned too much to simply walk away. Working in her spare time, she continued to investigate, following leads that led deeper and deeper into a world where the normal rules of law enforcement didn't apply. In December 2004, she received a phone call that would provide the final piece of the puzzle. "Agent Hayes? This is Carmen Vasquez. I think you need to see something." Carmen had been going through Daniel's personal effects, items she had avoided touching for nearly a decade. In an old toolbox in their garage, she had found something that Daniel had hidden shortly before his disappearance. A small tape recorder and several cassette tapes labeled with dates from September and October 1995. The recordings revealed that Daniel had been approached by federal agents several weeks before his disappearance. They had offered him an opportunity to participate in a classified operation that would require him to fake his death and assume a new identity. The operation was described as crucial to national security, involving infiltration of terrorist cells operating along the Mexican border. Daniel's voice on the tapes revealed his internal struggle with the decision. He talked about his love for Carmen, his excitement about becoming a father, and his sense of duty to his country. In the final recording, made just 3 days before his disappearance, his decision was clear. "I know this will hurt Carmen terribly, and I may never be able to explain why I had to do this. But if I don't take this assignment, people will die. Maybe thousands of people. I have to believe that someday she will understand that I chose to protect her and our child by walking away from them." Hayes listened to the tapes with a mixture of admiration and horror. Daniel had made the ultimate sacrifice, giving up everything he loved to protect his country. But he had been betrayed by the very people who recruited him, eliminated when his usefulness ended. The investigation officially closed in January 2005, filed away as an unsolved missing person case. But Hayes knew the truth, and she made sure that Carmen knew it too. Daniel Vasquez had been a hero who paid the ultimate price for his service. His sacrifice had likely prevented terrorist attacks that could have killed thousands of innocent people. But he had been abandoned by the system he served, murdered to protect secrets that might never see the light of day. Carmen moved to Colorado in the spring of 2005, taking Elena far away from the desert where Daniel had vanished. She never remarried, never stopped wearing her wedding ring, never stopped hoping that someday the full truth about her husband's sacrifice would be revealed. Agent Hayes retired from the FBI in 2008, but she never stopped investigating. She kept copies of all the documents, all the evidence, waiting for the day when the truth could be told without endangering national security. And that day may never come. The desert keeps its secrets, and the shadow government operations that recruited Daniel Vasquez continue to operate in the darkness, protecting America from threats that most citizens never know exist. But somewhere in Colorado, a young woman named Elena Vasquez is growing up with the knowledge that her father was a hero who made the ultimate sacrifice for his country. And perhaps, in the end, that knowledge is enough. The mystery of Agent Daniel Vasquez may never be fully solved. But his story serves as a reminder that freedom isn't free, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose names never appear on monuments or in history books. They simply walk into the desert one night and never come home,